started. Welcome, welcome, welcome. On behalf of the Friends of the Library, we are really the sponsor of this event, but you're here for a special day because we've got extra guests that you'll be learning about here in the introductions. My name's Cindy Phillips. I'm actually on the board of the Friends of the Library. So on behalf of us, if you like what you see today in this program, we ask you to support the Friends of the Library. If you're watching this on video, then support your friends wherever you live, because it's an important part of community programs like this, enabling these to happen. So that's my commercial for today. I'm going to hand it over to Debbie, who's our programs Meet the Author coordinator here, and she's going to introduce the program today. Thanks, Debbie.
Good afternoon, I'm Debbie Humbertson, and I welcome you all to Harper Library in Southport, North Carolina. Our Meet the Author program is a favorite of our community, and I am pleased to welcome our special MTA guests, Mr. Otis Lee, his wife, Dr. Michelle Lee, and Mr. Teej Stouffer. So if you all can welcome them. I'll tell you a little bit about each one. Teej Stouffer is here in Southport for the first time, so welcome him.
Yes.
Creating something very special.
Mm-hmm.
He is the executive producer of Fascination Film Studio, which is a heritage and legacy documentary production company. Teej is producing a documentary about Otis Lee, and filming is happening right now. So we're all part of that. We are fortunate to have Otis Lee and his wife, Dr. Michelle Lee, here for a second visit. If you were here for the first visit, it was something very special. Mr. Lee has worn many hats. He is a lawyer, a real estate investor, and an author. We are here today to learn more about his third book, I Was Born in the Forest. The book chronicles one of his passions. He would like to share the story, his visits, and the interesting people he has met along the way. I Was Born in the Forest is about the misunderstood history of Quilombos of Brazil. This history continues to unfold and is one to be followed.
Guys, it's so good to have all of you here today. It's a joy for lots of reasons, but if you're making a documentary about somebody, a full room is way better than an empty room, and so you guys have done your job. Thank you very much for turning out for this talk today. I've had a lot of fun coming to know Otis and Michelle, and I make heritage and legacy films, so I'm a documentary film producer. Before I met Otis, I knew nothing of the Quilombos. And now that I've been working on this film since 2004, I was like, just read the book. Would you just read the book? And I said, okay, I'll read the book. And then that resulted in me saying, you know what? We really need to extend this book with a film that many, many people can see. Because I'd never heard of the Quilombos before. And since I've come to know about them, I ask people all the time, have you ever heard of this? And 100% of people say, never heard of it. We're going to change that. And so many people will come to know the story of the Quilombos and what they mean. And so you're going to get to learn that today. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Otis Lee, who has become essentially the de facto ambassador for the Quilombos of Brazil in the United States of America. Because they are not a sovereign nation, we don't actually have a U.S. ambassador to them. But if we did, his name would be Otis Lee.
Well, thank you so very, very much for the opportunity to be with you today. A writer, if he can get a film company to get an interest in his book, that's like the Holy Grail. And James Baldwin wrote about his journey. And one of the things he said was, if you can ever write a breakout book, then you can get started. So I never thought that I Was Born in the Forest would be that kind of book, but it appears it's on its way. I see some friends from Cedar Grove. I'm mighty happy to be here with them. I was a keynote speaker at Cedar Grove some years ago for their annual meeting, and my good friend, Colonel Gore, who was my ROTC commander, Tin Hut. Okay, so let's get started. What you see are 3 books that I have written. I've been in the writing business for 20 years. All of the books that I have written, I have actually gone to the places where they take place. In the South Boston to Cambridge book, which is about the journey of an African-American family in America that traces the genealogy of the Lee family from the 19th century through the 21st century. My great-great-great-grandfather, his name was Amos Lee. Amos Lee could not read or write. He was illiterate. Now, you might recall, you might know, that during the Civil War, some of the elites in the South did not have to go to fight. If you were rich enough, all you had to do was to donate material, food, money, or you could take your slaves with you, and they could be used in the fight. There's a picture over there that you might take a look at that basically my genealogist researcher found of a slave by his master who was a Confederate soldier who was used just like my grandfather, Amos Lee. He was used to be a runner, and he ran from Confederate camp to Confederate camp, taking messages and all this sort of thing. And so my grandfather, Amos Lee, did that job for him, and he couldn't read or write. But generations later, from what he started, we have in our family people who not only can read or write, but they've become barristers of law in the UK. They have become PhDs in education and all that sort of thing. So from nothing has grown to be quite a lot. So from illiteracy to being literate is the journey. And it talks about an African-American family. Now, you have to understand, John Hope Franklin, one of our noted historians, said that black people in this country have done well not because of America, but in spite of America. And so this is that journey. And so we're trying to make that because slowly erase the spite and let it be a confluence of opportunity for everyone. Now, the second book, The Last Train from Djibouti, is a very interesting story because it captures the journey of 2 women, one a young sophomore at Southport College, an elite university in the Northeast, who was caught up in the fervor of the civil rights movement and wanted to go to Africa, wanted to experience Africa. One of the issues about Africa in the Americans of African descent, they have a problem, there is a gap in their history of where they came from. So many of our people want to go back to Africa to try to fill that gap. So this is the journey of a young woman from Southport College who went to Africa. She went to Uganda, and she was slated to work there as a student and to work there. And she stayed there for, I think, about 90 days or almost 4 or 5 months before she had to leave because of some problems with Idi Amin and all that sort of thing. But she grew up there, but she found that Africa was not what she anticipated. But she learned so much by going and became more appreciative of her status as an American of African descent, having viewed herself from Africa. So it was a great journey. Now, her mentor, Dr. Harriet Karuji. Dr. Karuji is a PhD, and she was a professor of nursing education at Columbia University. Dr. Karuji started a nursing program in Botswana, and it is a program that is still going on today. Dr. Karuji fell in love with Africa. She wanted to become an African, but she found out she could not become an African. You can't become an African unless you are an African, okay? So she was disabused of that illusion, and she went to Botswana to do that program, establish that program, and she also learned a lot of things about Africa that she didn't know. You see, a lot of times if you hear all these things about different things and people tell you about that, you can't believe all that stuff. You got to do the research, do the writing. You got to travel. You got to touch and feel the land, so to speak, so that you know the reality and you're not dependent on the media for the information that you get. So that's what these two women were able to accomplish. Now, the book we're going to talk about today, I Was Born in the Forest, really is a tremendous read, I'd have to say so myself. We're going to talk about Quilombos in this book, all right? And I'm going to tell you about Quilombos. I'm going to give you the short course. I used to teach at several universities, and so this is going to be Quilombo 101, okay? There's a lot to this subject, but I'm going to give you a good introduction to it today so that if you travel to Brazil in the future, make sure you visit the Quilombos to see what is really going on, not only with the indigenous people, but the Afro-Brazilians who came from Africa. Go ahead. Now, this is a mural painted by Eduardo Cobar. It's called The Five Ethnicities. Brazil is a multiracial society. They have quite a few racial populations that live in Brazil. It's like no place else in the world. They have the indigenous Indians, and you can see the headdress around. He's captured that. They have Africans. You can see the facial features of the African there. They have the whites. They have the Asians. And they have what are known as pardos. Pardos are miscegenated blacks or Africans who have been miscegenated with Indians and European whites. And they actually are 92 million of their population. The population of Brazil is 218 million. 92 million are pardos. 20 million are blacks, okay? And the rest are European whites and some Asians. So you can see that he's a very famous muralist, and this mural really captured my attention. I saw this in Rio de Janeiro, and I just fell in love with it, so I wanted to share that with you. Go ahead. Now, this is a picture that is a painting that is on display at the African American Museum in Rio de Janeiro. It shows Africans having a moment of levity here. In the back is what we call an engenho, which is a slave estate plantation. So they're having a little respite here, trying to perhaps get away from some of the problems of the day. And you can see these Africans are doing a particular dance. And we're going to talk about a dance that's called capoeira. Capoeira is a martial arts dance that the Africans invented in order to get their stress out. And we're going to show you a picture of that. And it is actually still practiced today. Capoeira, it's called. So this is a joyous moment in a very tough time. Okay. Our theme for today are three nouns. And we're going to talk about how these nouns interact with the Quilombo. We're talking about land, identity, and culture. These three elements, these three nouns, are what life is all about, if you think about it. The land that you have, your homes, this is what you have striven for all your lives, is to have your land. You know how important it is for you to have a deed, to own your property, okay? The Quilombos, the Quilombolas, who are the descendants, they're fighting for land. The land is everything. Will Rogers said, they ain't making no more land, okay? So you got to get a piece while you can, all right? So that's why the land is so important. The next element is identity. Now, who you are has a lot to do with your culture, your connection to the land. So identity is really important because identity is related to heritage. And then lastly, we talk about culture. Everybody has a culture. We want to protect our culture. We want to extend our culture. And so the Quilombolas, the descendants of Quilombo's, or slaves who lived in Quilombo's, are trying to do that. They're trying to not be assimilated. They want to be acculturated, and that's a big difference. And the difference lies in the fact that they don't want to have their culture eviscerated or thrown away or destroyed, and they want to embrace the broader culture as well. So they want an integration of cultures, not an elimination of their culture. So we're going to talk about these three themes throughout the presentation. Okay, now, we're talking about the Quilombo movement. Let's first give you a definition of what a Quilombo is. A Quilombo is a maroon settlement of slaves who absconded, went into the mountains to establish their own communities. You see, when the Portuguese and the Dutch tried to colonialize Africa, they went into these countries and they were looking for slaves and other kinds of export products. Well, when they went into these areas, they captured many, many millions of Africans. They actually, the historians say they captured some and trafficked some 4.5 million Africans into slavery into the Americas. Well, some of these Africans didn't want to be enslaved, all right? They said, we're not going to have this. The reason is that when they went in, the Portuguese and the Dutch, and they captured these people, they didn't distinguish kings or queens or noblemen. And you see, these Africans were quite educated people. Some of them had actually been educated in Portugal. Some of them spoke Portuguese. Some of them were Christians. They had had a relationship with the hierarchy in Portugal for years before the Portuguese came and decided to take over their country. So when the Europeans came, the Portuguese and the Dutch, and they came and took these people, they were capturing queens and kings and everything else. Now, you all know who Nelson Mandela was. Nelson Mandela said when he went through his trial in South Africa and they put him in prison, and we visited his prison there in South Africa, he said, well, they will never destroy me. They're not going to destroy me. Why? Because I know where I came from. I came from kings and queens. I'm just not anybody. So he had that fortification, and that helped him to survive over 27 years in prison, okay? Because he was trying to free his people. And what were they fighting for? Identity, land, and culture. All right, so the Quilombo movement started in the 17th century. They say that the main Quilombo, known as Quilombo or Quilombo dos Palmares, started between 1600 and 1605 and lasted to 1694, some 70 years. It was the biggest settlement of ex-slaves in the world. Because of this history, it developed into a social political movement in Brazil today, because the freed slaves, the descendants of slaves, we call them Quilombolas, they are kind of under the gun. They're at the lowest caste of society in Brazil. And so as a result of this kind of treatment, over the years, a political movement has developed, and now their representatives, their politicians, their advocates are now pushing this history of Quilombola to get better rights, to get some freedom, to get some dignity, and to hold on to their land. Quilombos are autonomous communities formed by runaway slaves, descendants of slaves in rural communities. Let me get some water here. Now, it's important to know that when we talk about Quilombos, there's a difference between what is known as a Quilombo and what is also known as a Macambo. The Quilombo really is a large settlement of villages. These villages are called Macambos because that's the individual unit. When you put all of these units together, they become a Quilombo. And we're going to talk about the Quilombo dos Palmares in just a minute, and that was the one that really has given us this history as the flagship Quilombo in this era. So we had Quilombo, Quilombolas, autonomous communities formed by runaway slaves and descendants of slaves in rural communities. All right, this is a graphic which was on display at one of the Quilombos that we visited. And you can see the enslavers trying to recapture these Africans. And you see over there, the Quilombo community, they are very serious about resisting the elimination of their culture. They're very serious about holding on to their land. So they've been fighting this since the 17th century. So you can see that they were not accepting their enslavement. They were not even beginning to accept it. They fought and they resisted. And that's what we have to do today. Now, you remember and you know Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter was a great guy, and I really enjoyed him as a president. One of his signature issues was human rights. That's what this is about, human rights. People trying to emancipate their rights, human rights. And Jimmy Carter spent his post-presidency trying to do that, trying to help marginalized communities, trying to help them gain the rights that they were entitled to. So Jimmy Carter inspires my thought when I think about the Quilombos and the Quilombolas, because they're trying to ascertain more fully their human rights. All right, now, this is a graphic that gives you an idea of what some of these communities in the Macambos or in the Quilombos may have looked like. Now, notice here, this is a white person. They're not all black. The people who came to the Quilombos were not just all Africans. It's what we call an eclectic group of people. They had Indians, they had disaffected whites, they had slaves, they had freed blacks who also populated these Quilombos. And they did so because they did not want to be a part of the colonial system that was being operated in Brazil at the time. They were disaffected. Some of the soldiers who were fighting some of these Quilombolas, they didn't like it, so they joined them. So you had a lot of people who lived in Palmares. So, as you can see here, Palmares was the largest and most famous of all of the Quilombos. At one time, they had over 25,000 residents. There's a lot of controversy in the literature saying that somewhere between 10,000 and maybe 30,000 slaves populated this place. And that's a whole lot of people, okay? Now, what does the Quilombo represent? It represents the struggle for racial equality and land rights in Brazil. And we're going to talk more about the land rights as we go through this. But when you break it all down, it comes down to people trying to protect what they have. That's all. Each of you have a deed, or you're working to pay for your property to get a deed to your property, to show that you own it, right? And nobody can dispossess you of that. That's what you work every day to make those mortgage payments, or to pay rent to keep your abode there for your family. That's what this is all about, okay? It's about land and land rights. These people are trying to do that. Now, all of you also, if you don't have one, you probably need to get one, and that's called a will, okay? A will. And why do you need a will? And I used to practice estate planning as a lawyer. I did that, and I drafted hundreds of wills and trusts. But why do you write a will? Because you're trying to transfer what you have worked for to your loved ones, okay? You're trying to transfer it to your children, to your relatives. Tig was telling me about some of his neighbors in Iowa, the farmers, and they're very, very concerned about being able to transfer their farms to their sons and daughters and so forth and so on. And a lot of the community may not be supportive of it, and then sometimes they are. So, same thing. These people are trying to transfer their wealth in culture and land to their descendants. So we're talking about wills, we're talking about land, we're talking about identity, and we're talking about freedom and equality. So basically, this is what the struggle is represented in: racial equality and land rights in Brazil. Now, the research shows that there are some 6,000 of these communities all over Brazil. 6,000 of these communities, all started by the original slaves who absconded to the hills and the mountains and started these communities. So they have populated. And see, what happened is, when slavery came to an end, abolished in 1888, the slaves had nowhere to go. They stayed on the land where they were enslaved. Some of them went into the forests and into mountains that were uninhabited, and they stayed there. Why? Because they were excluded from the main society of Brazil. So they had to have somewhere to live, they had to eke out an existence, so they stayed on the land. And that is the issue today. They stayed on the land, so they feel they're entitled to the land. Because when they stayed on the land was not owned by any particular landowner. The government of Portugal, because of its colonialization of that country, legally had title to the land. But they didn't know where the land was, where these people were. They were up in the mountains somewhere, okay? But these Africans knew where they lived. And so they had their communities and they stayed there. All right, so over 6,000 of these communities, and guess what? They occupy or have a claim to almost 1/3 of the landmass in Brazil. That's amazing. 1/3 of the landmass in Brazil. Brazil has approximately 3.3 million square miles of land. Palmares, at the time of its height, occupied 6,300 square miles. Over 16 million Quilombolas live in these Quilombos. Brazil has 218 million people approximately. 16 million of those folks, that's a lot of folks, occupy these Quilombos. 6,000 Quilombos, 1/3 of the country. So this is why this is such an important issue in Brazil today. And we're going to talk a little bit more about how the legalities of all of this are working out. Go ahead. Okay. Those of you that were here the first time probably saw this graphic, but let me give you just an idea about what this is about. Now, if you were here before and you're coming back, that's because you didn't pass your exam, okay? So I know you want to make up and try to get through the course, okay? So you came back to take some better notes and to try to be prepared for the exam. And I'm going to give you an exam when we get through. All right. In any event, the central area of Congo is where a lot of these Africans came from. And at the time, Congo included the African country of Angola. Now, the Portuguese, when they went into Congo, they were fighting with these people. They were fighting with the Congolese. They were fighting with these owners of Congo. And so they tried to carve out a piece of Congo, and they successfully did, and it is now known as Angola. They have a large port there called Luanda, and that's where they loaded all the slaves in and shipped them to the Americas. As you can see, a big swath came to Brazil. The others went into the Caribbean and into North America. And all along the Gold Coast here, they raided these African kingdoms and captured these Africans. Now, what tribes were these Africans? Where did they come from? They were Bantus, they were Yorubas from Nigeria, the Fons and so forth. They came from Mozambique and Togo and Benin, all these kinds of places. My African ancestry is with the Yu people. The Yu people live near Togo. They live down in the southeast portion of Ghana and Togo. So it's possible that even my ancestors may have populated Palmares at any particular time. We have no way of really knowing. But the Portuguese and the Dutch raided these areas to get these Africans and brought them to Brazil. Now, as we said earlier, Palmares is the largest rural Quilombo, but actually most Quilombos were relatively small. The Portuguese came up with a definition of Quilombo as being 2, 3, or 4 Africans who absconded into the mountains. That was their definition. But as you can see, there were all numbers of people in these Quilombos, but the definition of a Quilombo at that time, in the colonial period time, was just any number of African slaves who had run off into the communities. All right, so as I said before, they're urban, rural, they live in the forest, some of them in the islands around there, and they have extended families. And of course, the land that they potentially have a claim to is over 4.4 million acres. And this is an interesting tidbit here. Of the 6,000 Quilombos that exist today, only about 250 have gained titles to their land. 250. And of that 250, only 8 have gotten deeds to their land of the entire territory that they occupied. Okay, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. So, 6,000 Quilombos, only 250 have gotten that precious deed. Go ahead. All right, this is a graphic that gives you an idea so that you can get a sense of the breadth and width of the Quilombo dos Palmares. It started up here in the northeast, up in a state called Alagoas, and extended down to the northern central portion of Brazil, down in Bahia. You've probably heard of Bahia. If you haven't gone, you need to go. It is the city in South America, in Brazil, that has the largest number of Africans of any city in the world, save for Africa, okay? Beautiful beaches, beautiful women, all kinds of good foods, okay? I guarantee you, you'll have some fun. All right, so all of these folks here occupied this area, okay? Now you can see, because of this big swath of land that these Africans were claiming title to, that's a threat to the colonial authorities. I mean, just think about it. You bring these Africans, people you call barbarians, they were not of your equal, and you bring them and you enslave them. You treat them like animals. You cut off their Achilles tendons. You do all that kind of stuff. And they have the courage to try to establish their own community in South America. These Africans were very courageous, and they had a lot of chutzpah. They had a lot of courage to be able to be brought from Africa, come over here to South America, a European country, and try to set up a republic. Some writers have said they tried to set up an African republic in South America. And they came very close to being able to do that. Had they not been defeated, this section of Brazil would probably be an African republic in South America. All right? That's why it was so important for the Portuguese to defeat them. They threw everything they could at these people in order to defeat them. They were attacked for more than 127 times over the life of their existence. And they defeated them all of those times except for one time. Now, they took their hits. They were hurt. They took a lot of casualties and so forth and so on. But they survived. And they survived all the way until 1694. And remember, they started somewhere between 1600 and 1605, and it lasted until 1694. So that's almost the entirety of the 17th century. And they were able to defeat the Portuguese and the Dutch, all during this time. Now, moving along, these red triangles represent the Macambos. Remember what I said what the definition of a Quilombo is. It's a collection of Macambos. When you look at the entirety of the land and the community is called a Quilombo, all right? And what does a Quilombo basically mean to you? It means freedom, resistance, equality, and protection of your culture and your land. And everybody in this room is in love with those concepts, because that's what you're living for, to protect what you go to work for every day, to try to transfer over to your loved ones, we call them descendants, what you've worked for, and you want to protect your culture. If you're from Ireland, if you're from England, if you're from Scotland, we were in Norway. My wife comes from the Sami people. I thought she was pure African, but but she is part Norwegian. So we took a trip up there to try to find some of her people, and we did. So you see, culture. This is what I'm saying. It's all about protecting everybody is trying to protect their culture. That's what these Quilombolas are trying to do. They want to hold on to their African culture, just like you might want to hold on to your European culture. Go ahead. All right. This gives you the symbol of the resistance, the résistance. In the early 1900s, the process of gaining recognition for Quilombo's began. And as the graph says, this is a social movement, and that social movement really got started in the 1970s. Now, very quick little synopsis here. Brazil was under a military government for 21 years, from 1964 to 1985. And during that period, the military ran Brazil. They were not a democracy. Now, when the military government ended in 1985, what happened was all of this pent-up emotion, all of this pent-up fight that had been going on began to burst out. And the black movement then made its move to get the government to begin to acknowledge the Quilombos and their contribution. So the authorities in Brazil put together what is known as a constituent assembly. A constituent assembly is a group of senators and representatives who assemble to write a constitution. Just like the writing of the American Constitution, right? All of the states sent representatives. These were noblemen, senators of their states and so forth. So in 1987 and 1988, when this process was unfolding, the black movement was able to lobby these constituent assembly members and get them to adopt Article 68. Now, Article 68. Article 68 is a provision in the Brazilian Constitution that recognizes for the first time in Brazilian history the existence of Quilombos. Recognizes for the first time in Brazilian history the contribution of Africans who helped to build Brazil, okay? Because up to that time, they were marginalized. They treated them like they didn't even exist. But these are the folks who helped to build Brazil. So, 1988, a new constitution is written, and we call it the transitional constitution because they were transitioning from military rule to democracy. So at that time, in 1988, when this happened, Article 68 was adopted, and at that time, for the first time in Brazilian history, they recognized these rights. Some historians have said that the Article 68 in the new Constitution was a constitution that broke away completely from earlier Brazilian history. And that was the time, for the first time in Brazil, that it publicly and legally declared itself a multiracial community. You saw that first graph of that beautiful painting by Kobar. For Brazil, it was the first time in all of their existence that they recognized, look, we got to recognize the people who helped us build this. We have to recognize these Africans. We have to recognize these Indians. And let me not forget the indigenous population, because they played a key role in this whole thing. And when you read the book, you will see that the Indians and the Africans intermixed. Same thing they did here in the United States. And while I'm on that subject, you know, we had Macambos or Quilombo equivalents right here in America. In the southeast area of the Carolinas, South Carolina, we had the same thing. They're called maroon communities. Now the difference is that in the United States, the Maroons in the United States could not survive. They couldn't survive because in the United States during this period, a lot of the land had been cleared. So they didn't have anywhere to hide. And so they didn't stay there that long. Whereas in Brazil, you had all this forestation that had not been developed. So they could go into the mountains and use the forest as defense. And they used the forest. Now the word palmares is the Portuguese word for palm tree. They used the palm tree, and these people were pretty smart. They went into the mountains looking to settle in areas forested by palm trees. Why? They could subsist on it. They could eat the coconut. They could make coconut oil. They could drink the juice from the coconut. They could use the leaves and all of the foliage of the tree to build their huts and to give them shelter. So it wasn't by a coincidence they went into the forest. They went into the forest and actually looked for areas to settle that had palm trees. Hence we have Quilombo dos Palmares. That's how the name arrived. Okay, very quickly here. Palmares lasted longer than the black enclave in Oklahoma. You know that's a big issue now. The authorities down there are trying to come to grips with that tragedy that happened. Well, Palmares lasted longer than Tulsa, where the blacks were successful there. Wilmington, North Carolina, our city to the north. Palmares lasted longer than when the blacks controlled Wilmington. We know that started around 1860 and it was destroyed by the whites in 1898. All right? So Palmares, and it's my theory that Palmares and the Quilombos are really the forerunners of black towns. Because for the first time, when these Africans were brought over to the Americas, it became obvious that they could not live under the oppression that they were subjected to. So they established their own communities. And if you look at the underpinning for a lot of black towns and black cities, is because people of a common feather sometimes like to live together. So they came together, okay? And they incorporated themselves and they made a life for themselves. Go ahead. All right, this is a graphic that shows you how one of the Quilombos may have looked. Look around the perimeter. These are called palisades. They are trees that have been cut and sharpened at the top, put together with ligaments and so forth, and they build kind of a fort. In the center is where the government usually would be. They would have their court or their legal system, they would have their churches and so forth and so on. And the other little areas where you see the villages, the adobe huts and so forth, are where the people resided. So that's a classic example how one Quilombos may have looked. Palmares was in the interior of Alagoas. It's a very big state in the Northeast. And as we said earlier, it lasted for almost 100 years. And they had anywhere from 9 to 11 Quilombos. You see that word again, Quilombos. And what are the historians calling this? A Neo-African kingdom. Neo meaning new. Okay? These folks were coming over here to establish an African kingdom in the Americas. They had the, I don't want to use a big word, but they had the bravery to do that. To be able to come over here enslaved, not having a thing, but to try to establish their community. That's, to me, that's extremely significant. It takes a lot of courage to do that. All right, now, Palmares was bigger than the state of Vermont, Hawaii, Connecticut, Delaware, some say even Massachusetts. Some say that Palmares was even larger than the country of Portugal at one time. And remember, they had anywhere from 10 to 30,000 people. And what happened is that the slaves who were still being enslaved that hadn't escaped to Palmares heard about Palmares. And so they wanted to go to Palmares. So that's why it was such a big issue with the slaveholders. They had to destroy this because it was destroying the slave economy. They couldn't have a panacea for these slaves existing in their midst when they're trying to enslave these people. Okay? So it was a gravitational kind of thing. So Palmares was a lightning rod. It was a big threat. And of course, you can see the large amount of the land area. Go ahead. All right, this beautiful African woman, her name is Aquatoon. Aquatoon is sometimes known as the mother of Palmares. She was the mother of Ganga Zuma. Ganga Zuma was the leader of Palmares for a very, very long time. He led his people through many of these battles with the Dutch and the Portuguese, and he was able to do it for a long time successfully, so he kept his people safe. She also is the grandmother of the hero of our talk, Zumbi. Zumbi has an interesting story. I'm not going to give you the whole story because you have to read the book and we don't have time to do all that. But Zumbi was a special kind of guy. He was raised by a Catholic priest in a town near the coast. And Zumbi was trained in Latin. He was trained in Portuguese. He could read, he could write. But after he got of age, he decided to go to Palmares. He learned about it. He didn't know it, but Ganga Zuma was his relative, okay? So when he got there, with the background that he had, he immediately was kind of given a promotion, okay? He was given rank in this community because he had the information, he had the knowledge. He had lived with the Portuguese. He knew some of their thinking. So when he joined his uncle, Ganga Zuma, in Palmares, he immediately was given a position of leadership. All right, so basically here, as it says here, Quilombo dos Palmares, the most significant and enduring symbol of resistance against slavery in Brazil. Now, Aquatoon came from royalty in Congo, okay? She was the daughter of a Congolese king. Now, when the Portuguese were in Brazil subduing these Congolese, they didn't distinguish, as I said earlier, between the nobles and the non-nobles, and she was caught up in this whole thing and then shipped to Brazil to be enslaved. This is a picture of her son, Ganga Zuma, as he may have appeared during that time, a real heroic kind of warrior figure. Ganga Zuma was a leader of Palmares. He was brought to Brazil by the Portuguese. He and his family were from Angolan royalty. They were not commoners. And he led Palmares for a substantial period of time. Now, as in all good stories, they all come to an end. Things don't always work out. In 1678, Ganga Zuma tired of the fight. He was tired of fighting these people. And remember, I said that Palmares was attacked by the Dutch and the Portuguese almost 27 times. They were tired because all they had to do was all the time preparing for fights. They had to fight and then they had to rebuild and they had to fight and they had to try to keep their crops going. You just think about all that would be required if you had to prepare for battle, not knowing when the battle was going to come, but you knew it was going to come and you had to constantly keep at the ready, okay? So he was tired of that. He wanted to bring peace to his people. And so he entered into an agreement in 1678 with the Portuguese for the purpose of settling the dispute. The Portuguese could not defeat these people, so they were amenable to the suggestion that let's reach a treaty, okay, let's settle this. But the Portuguese, as we say in the law, didn't have clean hands. They just wanted to disarm these people, get them to move closer to where they could be subjugated and so forth. When Ganga Zuma reached this agreement, it had what we call a poison pill in it. Because the agreement that the Portuguese reached with them required that they send back to Brazil and to the plantations all those ex-slaves who had gone to Palmares. And this was what caused Ganga Zuma's undoing. Because his leaders, you saw all of the graph of the Macambos and all the people there, each one of those guys, each one of those villages had a leader, okay? And they all assembled at the capital of Palmares, known as Macacos, and they met. And so when Ganga Zuma brought this agreement back, like to a Congress and say, look, this is what I've negotiated. You know, I think it's a good deal for you. We ought to take this, and we can maybe live in peace, and we can probably prosper and not have to worry about fighting the Portuguese for the rest of our lives. But it was a subterfuge. It was not real, okay? So some of the Pomeranians went with Gangazuma when they executed the agreement, and they moved, and the others stayed. So we had Palmares was then split in two. We had the old Palmares and the new Palmares. And so those that went with Gangazuma in the new Palmares moved to an area that was closer to the authorities in Brazil, and they were able to get to them. And the Portuguese, after Gangazuma was killed, said that, all right, you killed the guy who negotiated this agreement. That's a breach of the agreement. The agreement is no longer in effect. And what did they do? They killed him. They slaughtered him, okay? So all that was left were the ones who stayed in the old Palmares. And they were led by Zumbi. And Zumbi was able to keep them alive and keep them going until the end of their existence in 1694. This is a picture of a sculpture of Zumbi in fighting mode. He was quite a charismatic figure. So Zumbi was the leader of Palmares after Gangazuma's death. He fought against the dismantling of Palmares. His leadership was marked by continuous resistance. So you ask yourself, well, what does the Quilombo mean to me? How do I relate to the Quilombo? All right? How do I relate? How does my situation relate to the struggle of the Quilombos? You are fighting for resistance to keep your property. You're fighting to keep your inheritance. You're fighting to keep your culture. You're all, to some extent, members of the Quilombo. This is a photograph of Palmares Memorial Park up in outside of Alagoas in northeastern Portugal. We were there just a few months ago, and you can go into a lot of the huts and things like that that are replicas of how it actually was. And so all of this ensued from the 1988 Constitution, when for the first time Brazil decided to acknowledge these people and their contribution. So they built a memorial park to memorialize it. This is an example of one of the buildings there on the grounds. So the Afro-Brazilian peasants, the poor folks who are Quilombolas, who are on these properties, but now they're not all poor and destitute. We're going to show you that. They started out that way as slaves, but a lot of these folks have done reasonably well, but they still stay on that land, okay? And they're still not in the mainstream of Brazilian society. And that's what this whole movement is about. The black movement in Brazil is trying to elevate them for the first time, to get them to throw off the epithet of being a slave so that they can be a part of the community. So again, the transitional constitution, transitioning from military rule to democracy. That's why they got Article 68. All right, as we draw to a close on this portion of the presentation, these yellow circles represent where these Quilombos, a lot of them, are located, and the ones that have applications for deeds that are pending. All right? When this graph was put together, some 1,500 applications were pending to be given deeds, 1,500. The newest information is there are some 1,800 of those applications are pending. The brown circles indicate the number of Quilombos that have actually been deeded. That says 167, but the latest data is there's about 250 of them. And very quickly, you can see you have large numbers in Bahia and up in the northeast in that area, and you have a fair amount as you go south into Brazil, down Sao Paulo, and so forth and so on. Go ahead. All right, so the kids, that's what it's all about. Trying to save the inheritance for the kids. And in many instances, the Constitution remains unmet. They have been very slow to give these people their land, but at least they have a legal underpinning to try to get it. So they have something to fight with. Very low numbers have been given their titles. And of course, once they get recognition, then they're able to get services and things like that. Go ahead. I love this graph here because this shows the workers at a Quilombo going into the field. Now let me quickly say, in Africa, a lot of the land and the territory was occupied by African tribes in regions. They didn't have states. That state thing didn't start until the Europeans came over there, and they did what is called established nation states. But prior to that, that was not the case. So everything was populated by region and by tribes who occupied a certain region. All right. The Quilombos, because they have this land in certain regions, when the government decides to give them their deed after they meet the requirements, they don't give the deed to any individual. They give it to the association, the group, all right? Because it is a representation of how Africans lived. It's called collective titleization. Collective title. No one person gets the deed goes to the group, and then all of the members of the group have legal rights to be in that land. And they work the land together, they share the fruits of the land, so nobody's ever hungry all the time, nobody is without a place to stay, so they have that. And someone was asking me the other day, well, what about crime? They don't have any crime in Quilombo's, all right? It's crime-free, because these people love their community. They fought for these communities. They are respecting their ancestors, so they don't have no crime. If they have a dispute, they have a meeting and they settle the dispute. But now, once they step outside of the Quilombo, then they run into police brutality, all this kind of stuff, because the larger society heretofore has not respected their status as descendants of slaves. Remember, the slaves are at the lowest caste of Brazilian society. The 1968 Constitution attempted to elevate that, give them recognition for their land, and so forth. Go ahead. All right, this is a joyous moment here, very joyful. You can see this paper here. He's got his deed, his group, so it's a happy, happy time. As the graph says, it took over 100 years after the abolition of slavery for the Brazilian state to allow these people to claim their land. 100 years. And it still ain't happening, but at least has started in earnest. The land entitlement process, when you pass a law, the law, before it becomes directly applicable to the people, it has to go through a series of reviews and analyzations and so forth, and the government has to put forth regulations of how this law is going to be implemented and so forth. And the people who fight the Quilombolas, the conservatives, they don't want this. So they file lawsuits. The Supreme Court of Brazil ruled in favor of the Quilombolas, ruled in favor of the constitutionality of Article 68, and therefore the legality of what was negotiated in 1968 is not readily in dispute. Doesn't mean that they're still not trying to, invalidate it. So that's what is going on now. So once they get their land, they must go through a process called recognition, meaning they have to prove that they are descendants of slaves who actually lived on the land and that they are still on the land. That's a prerequisite to being a Quilombolas. Then they have to get the area mapped, what we would call a survey. If you ever bought a piece of property, one of the things the lawyer is going to do is he's going to survey the metes and bounds of how your property is located and where other borders are. So they have to go through that. Then they can get recognition, and then once they get recognition, they're on their way to getting a deed. Now, before I end this phase, we have in this area a concept called Quilombismo. Quilombismo is the philosophical underpinning of the Quilombo movement. You can't have a movement like this unless you've got some intellectuals who lay out the philosophy that will govern how this is supposed to be viewed by the larger public. The Quilombolas were able to find that man. His name was Abdias do Nascimento. Nascimento was one of the few black members of the House of Deputies in Brazil during this time. Nascimento had to be exiled because of his advocacy for Quilombos. He had to leave Brazil. And this was during the military period. up until starting before in the 1970s when the military was running the place. He had to leave there, and he came to the United States. And he took a professorship at the Southern University of New York. And while there, he supported all kinds of freedom struggles going on, even the Afro-American freedom struggle. But he came up with the ideological underpinning for the Quilombos. He would be equivalent to a W.E.B. Du Bois and some of his ilk, and some of the other Africans who were key into developing freedom for Africans in the colonial period, Jomo Kenyatta, Kwame Nkrumah, and so forth. Now, one of my African heroes, Leopold Sédar Senghor, came up with the concept of negritude. Now, we talked about culture. That's what this is all about. Negritude is the philosophy of blackness that basically says, hey, we want to enjoy the benefits of the European culture. They've achieved a lot. We want to incorporate, we can learn from them. So we want to incorporate that into our culture. But we don't want our own culture subsumed by that incorporation. We want to keep what's good of our African culture and blend it in with the other communities that we can learn from. So this is called acculturation, not purely assimilation. Because if you assimilate all the time, you end up with nothing, okay? All right, so that's about the underlying philosophy of the Quilombo. Go ahead. They're all different. They have different histories. They have different roots of ancestry in Africa. They earn their livings different ways. And let me just mention this to you. The Quilombos and Quilombo dos Palmares, these Africans, they traded with the neighboring communities. There were Portuguese settlers all in these towns, and so they would make baskets and they would raise crops and they would trade with the surrounding community in order to support themselves. They believed in economic self-sufficiency. They had to believe in economic self-sufficiency because they had nobody to help them. They had to feed themselves. They had to defend for themselves. They had to raise their children. So economic self-sufficiency, economic independence is the underlying economic doctrine that characterizes Quilombos. And we can all relate to that. We all want to be economically independent. That's why we go to work every day. We save money. We put money in the stock market. We do all that kind of stuff for the purpose of not having to depend on the government, right? Okay. Now, we're under an administration that's trying to take government away from you, all right? These people want the government to help them. But the government is also an obstacle. We have the same problem in the United States, right? People talk about Trump's taking away Social Security. Well, we want Social Security because that's government, okay? These folks want the government to implement Article 68. But it is the government that controls how much of the land they get or don't get. So they're in a catch-22. But they need the government, just like we need the government. All right, so we're going to talk about the ones in bold. Go ahead, Michelle. Now, a little demographics. We went to about 10 of them this time. The majority of them are rural Quilombos, some 70%. The population can be anywhere from 26 to almost 2,200 people. They have homes, some a limited number, such as 5, or they could be 500. The acreage that they occupy, that they have, can be just under 270 acres or as much as over 709,000 acres. And they use hectares a lot in measuring land distances and metes and bounds over there a lot. All of them that we went to had gotten recognition. Remember, recognition is the first step. It's just like if they put in some kind of reparations or whatever. And I mentioned this in the book because I come up with a plan to help, if that issue ever comes to fruition, how to determine who would be entitled to it. One of the prerequisites in Brazil, in the Quilombo movement, to get recognized is you have to prove that you are a descendant of slaves. You have to prove that you are on the land that these ancestors left you and that you still are on that land, and you have to prove that you're using the land productively. Okay, so you got to prove all that. Then first tier recognition. Later on, you get your deed, okay? So it is a process. All right, so all of these that we're going to talk about today have gotten recognition, and only 60% have gotten their deed. All right, the first one is the Quilombo Makim, which is right outside of Alagoas. This is classified as a rural Quilombo, and of course, their Quilombo started from 2 slave families who were on the land, and they stayed there. The thing is, they don't like to discuss a lot of this stuff. A lot of them are ashamed. They're ashamed because many of their women were raped and molested. They don't want to talk about this history. They just want to try to make it as best they can under the environment that they're in. So they were not too forthcoming about some of this stuff because they want to move on. They don't want to deal with that. Go ahead. Now this is a street in Makim. You can see they all have houses. They've got roofs of various textures and so forth. And this is how they basically live. Now, you see they're in the mountains. You're going to always see them in the mountains, the ones that are rural, okay? Some are urban, but predominantly they're going to be in the mountains because remember, they went to the mountains for the safety of it, okay? They didn't have cannons and all that kind of stuff, so they had to use the natural land, the topography of the land, in order to at least have a chance to fight these attackers away. Go ahead. Oh yeah, she's telling me I need to say this. Okay, she's the boss. All right. This Quilombo was established in 1850. It's located in Maceió in Alagoas. It is classified as a rural Quilombo. They have about 160 homes. They're on about 198 acres. They were recognized in 1993, and they actually have their deed. Okay, they got the deed in 2005. This is a picture where we met with them and talked with them in their community center. We had a great time with them. Now this lady, her name is Albertina. Albertina is the leader of this community. Now, one other interesting fact about Quilombos, a lot of the women led these communities. All right, talking about women's rights, women leadership, a lot of women led these communities, and that's all in the history. They were not all led by men. I told you about Aquatoon. She was the founder, one of the founders of Palmares, a woman, all right? So a lot of women run the show. Men, get used to it. Go ahead. All right. This is a picture of our meeting with them in their meeting room. And I'm there, and Michelle's trying to help me get my papers together and all that type of thing. Irene, you could say sometimes I'm like a nutty professor. I never have a pen. I can't find my papers and all that stuff. So she's trying to get me straightened out there. Albertina is sitting there, and we've had a discussion about some of the issues. You know, when we met with these people, we wanted to know how they actually lived, what their fears were, what they wanted their children to get, how much education did they have, all this sort of thing. So we sat there and had these discussions. Sometimes it took over an hour or so. All of the members sometimes participated in the discussion. Because you see, when they found out we were coming, they all decided who was going to come. So all of these folks are members of the association, and they may have some kind of quasi-leadership position in the association. All right, this is interesting. Now you probably wonder, well, why is this important? Okay, that's a $20 bill. These people had never seen American currency, had never seen a greenback dollar, okay? We bought some souvenirs from them, tried to pay with it with American currency. They didn't want to accept that because they didn't know what that was. They didn't know what value it had, okay? We were like blown away because of that. But Albertina was so surprised. I said, well, we got to memorialize this. So we took a picture with her receiving her first dollars in American currency. That's a $20 bill. So that's why that's there. Now, I'm going to rest a moment and turn it over to my lovely wife and let her take it from here. Thank you.
Okay, when we left the Quilombo, it was time for lunch. And we ate at this restaurant, owned and operated by May the Dean. May was born in Quilombo territory. She she's a living heritage of Afro-Brazilian culture. She was called to sacred cooking before the age of 15. She learned cooking from her grandmother, Cecilia, and Cecilia was a great cook. And Cecilia had over 114 grandchildren, so huge family. May is noted for her Alagor's cuisine. And these are the words of May. I am proud to be a Brazilian woman, a black woman, and a cook. Food is for the body, soul, and resistance. The kitchen is where everything is born. I am a mother, a resistance, and Zumbi's daughter. We are the kids from the kings and the queens who have been enslaved. We dream with freedom in all of the senses. These are the words of May. And while we were there, we had a chance to eat some of her delicious, delicious food. And some of her recipes were from her grandmother, Cecilia. It was a lovely, lovely time. Now, when we were there, it wasn't just having fine dining, but it also was a time for socialization. And it was such an opportunity because when we were there, we met this gentleman here who's a professor at the University of Alagoas. His name is Zitu Aurora, and he is a scholar on Quilombos. So here we are, just having left the Quilombos, and Otis had just finished, of course, going over his book at the previous Quilombo. We're here with the young lady holding Otis's book, I Was Born in the Forest, and then the young man is holding the professor's book, The Quilombos. And what was interesting is that the professor's daughter, who he named Dandara, is translating Otis's book, I Was Born in the Forest, into Portuguese right now. So what a small world it is. And what was very interesting is that the professor, his lunchmate, was Albertina, who was the president of the association that we had just left. So it was such a great time to see her in an entirely different environment and to socialize with her. And we just had a great time. And I tell you, May is just a gem. She is truly a gem for her community and for her culture. And we really enjoyed our time there.
Okay. All right, my time again. Can't get rid of me right yet. Okay. This, thank you. This Quilombo is called Bom Despacho. Bom Despacho is Portuguese, and what it means is good message, good talk, good communication. Bom Despacho is, as you can see there, located in Alagoas. It was established near the end of the 18th century. It's a rural Quilombo. A population of just under 1,800. They got 465 homes. We couldn't get the acreage that they occupy, and we don't know whether they were recognized or not, but they obviously had to be recognized because they got their deed in 2009. Now, this is a street scene in Bom Despacho. Again, you can see these folks, they're not destitute, they're not, the dregs of the world. These folks have some industry about them because remember, historically, they had to get out and support themselves. So this is a street scene in the Bom Despacho. And you can see that the streets are not dirt roads, they are paved streets and that sort of thing. Again, commonality. Palm trees in the mountains, away, again, for the same reason. Go ahead. This is a scene of one of the churches in Bom Despacho. in Bom Despacho, the church here, this particular church, is the center of the community. Most of them are Catholics, and of course, they have all kinds of iconography in their church, and they're very proud of their church. And they trace their families and their ancestors directly to slaves. That's how they were able to get the recognition and go on and get their deeds. Now, how do they earn a living? They work sugar cane. All right, sugar was a big industry in Brazil. They also work in tourism. They work in the local cities as waiters and waitresses and all that sort of thing. And most of them are Catholics. They have a very modern look about them. And this is something I want to dispel, is that a lot of these Quilombos, as I said earlier, are not the most destitute people in the world. I mean, you know, they may not have a New York lifestyle or anything like that, but they are able to take care of themselves. They look after each other. They have an organization. Remember the communal thing. They have an organization. They have a local government. Okay, go ahead. Now, here we are still in the church, and this is Fernando. Fernando is the leader of this group. The two ladies work with him in the association and help him to take care of this beautiful church. These are the people we are interviewing. Now, you can't understand him. I understand that. He's speaking in Portuguese. But when we were there, we had an interpreter, all right? So he interpreted everything. So he's telling me how their organization works and what they do and all this type of thing. And look at his skin color. He doesn't have the African look because of what? Miscegenation, all right? That's why Brazil is a multicultural country, because they have miscegenated so with the Indians and the slaves that they have all colors. It's a rainbow. It's a rainbow coalition, so to speak. So that's Fernando there. Very, very nice guy. Now here we are with Fernando and two ladies. Now remember, these folks are self-sufficient. They earn their own money. They're not looking for any handouts. They support themselves. They have crafts that they make, and they sell these in the local markets, and they sell them out in the cities and so forth and so on. I have a platter that I purchased, and I still have it on my Lazy Susan today, that one of these ladies made. So these two ladies work in the crafts area, and Fernando wanted to make sure we met them. This is an example of some of the stuff they make. There's some placemats, and you can see baskets and all this sort of thing. But see, it may look like it's not a whole lot on an individual basis. But when you multiply it through all of the people who are doing this, and they're out making money, bringing that money back to their communities, you can see that they can rise above subsistence. Go ahead. Now, this is cassava. How many of you have ever had cassava? All right, okay, well, you know that. All right. Cassava is a food product that was very popular during the colonial period. It was a sustaining food for the indigenous Indians and for the Africans. And remember, these two groups, the indigenous and the Africans, were both fighting the same enemy. They were fighting the Portuguese. Because you have to understand, the Portuguese wanted to enslave the Indians first. They tried to do that. The Indians didn't work out, so they needed a more hardy human being, and they used the Africans. So cassava is what they raised in Palmares and these Quilombos, and this is how it's done. It's a root, and it's a root that grows in the central high plains of Brazil. These are the roots here. They get the roots and they peel the roots. Then they take those peeled roots and put them in a machine, and that further peels them, and they put water to wash them and all that sort of thing. After they do that, they put it in a press, and that press makes big bags, like bags of flour, that type of thing, a 20-pound bag, 10-pound bag. Then they take and empty those bags into a mixing bowl, let it cure for several hours or several days. Then they sift it to get it down to a very fine quality, and then they make the flour, and then they make bread. And this is how they were able to sustain themselves, because you got to remember, these folks were under attack, so they had to be able to get food, and the cassava was a ready place for food. It's a very common food. You can go to Brazil right now and have some cassava. They serve it to you in the restaurants. You can have it as a bread. I didn't particularly like the bread. But, you know, it's a good food, and it was sustaining to them. So it's a very popular food, and it is still being sold and eaten today, okay? All the way from what? The 17th century all the way to the 21st century. And this is the way, one of the ways they earn a living. All right. The next Quilombo that we visited was the Quilombo do Tudete. That means there. And basically, they say the origin of this Quilombo comes from a woman named Teresa da Benguela. Benguela was a woman. She was captured in Brazil, in Congo, near the port city of Benguela. So they call her Benguela. And of course, they take this name, Tudete, from her. It was established in 1894, located in Bahia. Remember I told you about Bahia, the largest state in the Americas with the most black people in it. It's an urban Quilombo, and they have some 2,200 people, over 500 homes, about 250 acres. We don't know when they were recognized, but we do know they got their deed in 2015, all right? So they own their land. This is a picture of their meeting center where we met with them and had our meeting. A lovely, large facility. This is an idea of what the community looks like. Again, the foliage, palm trees, out in the mountains and so forth. Most of the houses are either stucco or brick. This is the scene of the land around the community center. And, you know, they have a very good amount of foliage there. This is the meeting center that we had our meeting in. And this is the guy who is the leader, he and his wife. His name is Mastre. And Mastre is a master of capoeira. He teaches capoeira. And so that's what he does to earn a living, along with some other things, and this is where we met them. This is Mastre with his wife, Barbara. She's his second wife. And she has helped him run the association. I think she's a teacher, and she's also a very good cook. She cooked for us. Yes, ma'am.
The designing the floor, is that a game or part of the dance? Or?
It's probably a part of the capoeira dance area, because this is where they teach it, and that's where Mastre teaches his students. Go ahead. Again, the foliage, you can see the same thing. Centuries later, they're still doing the same thing, living in the same community. All right, I'm here with Mastre, and this is a young piece of breadfruit. How many of you had breadfruit? All right, so they've got trees growing breadfruit in the back of their villages and things. And they take that breadfruit and take it to the market and they sell it, okay? So in this area, they've got breadfruit that's in a young stage of growth. Now, the next one is the Quilombo Cafunda astrogilda. Now, what does the word Cafunda mean? It is a term that means a special language. You see, when the slaves were under attack and being enslaved, the slave owners would put informers in their midst. They would have people who would rat them out, so to speak, tell about their plans. So, being ingenious as they were, they developed a language. It's called Cafunda. And so they were able to communicate, and by communicating, conceal what they were trying to do. This group decided to name their name Cafunda, Astrogilda. And that's the name of one of the leaders' mother, Astrogilda. Now, this Quilombo has a very nice story. They're located in what is known as the Vajam Grande, which means a very large state park. And they have had a lot of problems, but they're working it through. It was established in 1824. They're right outside of Rio. We had to travel about an hour or more to get there. Just under 1,900 people, homes, 40 to 50 homes. The acreage is between 1,000 and 1,200. They were recognized in 2014, but they don't have a deed. This is another political issue with Quilombos. The land that these Quilombolas occupy is precious land, okay? And the state has an interest in keeping that land. They do not want these Quilombolas to have all this property. This is a state park located, White Rock State Park, one of the biggest parks in Brazil. and the Quilombos lay claim to it, okay? Remember, I said there are over 16 million of these folks who have a claim against 1/3 of the landmass of Brazil. This is one of them. And look at that view. This is a spring. This is where you can go swimming. I took a swimsuit to see if I could get in, but I was a little too hesitant, so I didn't do it. My swimming skills might not have held up too good. But in any event, this is their creek, their land, and they swim there. And of course, they've got and you see, they've got these communities all up in these mountains here, okay? There are people that live up there. Part of the main campus is below the mountains, but the mountains still house some of their members. Go ahead. All right, this is interesting.
Which means I was born in the forest.
Okay, now we didn't put him up to say that. He was our tour guide. This guy's name is Alexander. Now, Alexander is a geek. He's very good in computers. He works in computer factories and all that in the surrounding communities. He left his job to come stay in the Quilombo full time because his mother was ill and he wanted to take care of her. So he left his job in computers and came there. And he was taking us all around. And so we were at a stop and we were talking and he said, I was born in the forest, because they were all born in the forest, hence the title of the book. So this was Alex, and that was his expression that was really spontaneous, and I thought that was very nice. All right, a baby born in the forest. This is a mural on one of their walls. So you can see this is real stuff to these folks, very real. All right, this is Alex and I for a picture back in the settlement, up in the woods there, and you see he's got a long beard there, very charismatic guy. And he and his brother run in the leadership position in this particular Quilombo. They are fighting to keep their land. This is what they're doing. They're fighting the government because the government wants to take their land. This Quilombo had over 6,000 acres, but you saw that they are down to only 1,200. Because the government will not give them all that land because the government is interested in keeping this for the public use. And that's another issue with the Quilombos. They're located in environmentally sensitive areas of Brazil. The military has installations on some of their land, so the government wants to keep some of that land, but yet these people have a claim to it. So that has to be reconciled, okay? So that's why these folks, as ingenious as they are only down to 1,200 acres. And this is the backdrop of the area where we ate near their kitchen. This is all that foliage back there. So if you want to eat outside and enjoy the foliage, you go to Brazil and go to Astrogilda. You'll see plenty of foliage there. These are some of the foods we had, lovely cakes and drinks and all that kind of stuff. They fed us very well. We had coffee, water, whatever you wanted. And all of this food is natural food. They don't use a lot of additives and all this kind of stuff because they're raising their food. So they don't have all this extra sugar and all that. If you want sugar, you have to ask for it. Okay, go ahead. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Michelle. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, this was the last Quilombo that we visited for our research. It's the Quilombo de Carmo, and it has a raised fist. This is their flag. They have a raised fist. That's their symbol. And the text under that fist is land without masters. Land without masters. This is a photo of where this Quilombo is situated, up in the mountains. And this Quilombo was established between 1874 and 1886. It's in the São Paulo area. It's rural. They only have 250 people who live there, 54 homes, 1,200 acreage. They were recognized in 2002, but they have not received their deed. They're still waiting to receive their deed. Now this is Ika, who is the president of the association there. He's got his fist raised. And next to him is Melissa. She's one of the leaders in training there. She works in tourism and she's a midwife, and she's also training to be a nurse. She was married at age 15 And she has 6 children. Couldn't believe she was so young. But children is very important. We only have 250 people. So having more children is very important to them and to their future. This is also a picture of Otis and I with Melissa and Diana, who works in tourism and also in their bakery. This is one of the historical sites located in the Quilombo. This is a structure that used to hold over 40 plus slaves. And it's still there for you to see in order to just think about having 40 plus people living in that small structure. And here again is Melissa and Ike and Otis, which is this race. You know, they're always fighting. This is important to them because they have been fighting for so long and still they have not received their deed. The founders of this Quilombo came from several families, and it was a mixture of indigenous Indians and African slaves. So as you can see with Ika, you can tell that he has some indigenous Indian in his background. They sell a lot of crafts, they work in the markets. Their religion is mostly Catholic, but some of them are also Protestant. And what is special about them? We asked that question at all of the Quilombos that we visited. They're still fighting. They're fighting for their water rights. Their water was certified. The local judge agreed with them and supported them, but the city is against them in terms of gaining their water rights. What EK is saying is that they want to continue to reorganize and to get better. They want to recover their family traditions and prepare for the new generation. And in his words, he said, to be happy and have a better identity. Now, this is a basket that was found in our craft center. And as you can see, it's slave dolls, a mother's last gift. Now, think about it. You see a mother on a slave ship. She is in the midst of total chaos and madness. People are suffering. People are crying. 2 weeks ago, she was sitting at home with her family, her children. They were talking about what the children had done that particular day. Maybe she was preparing their meal for that evening. And maybe they were thinking about the festival that was coming, that they were all going to participate in. Now, 2 weeks later, she finds herself on a slave ship, chained. Now, as you know, mothers are very instinctive. And she said to herself, what am I going to do? What can I do? She thought about her children. And she knew that wherever the ship was taking them, that she may be separated from her children. So what could she do? She ripped some cloth from her clothing and she made a doll for each of her children. And she gave that doll to them so they could remember her love, that they could remember where they came from, their land, that they could hopefully remember their identity, and they could remember their culture. Now, I was given this slave doll when I was there from the Quilombos, and this is kind of represents something that she may have been able to try to do when she gave them a slave doll to her children as the last gift to them, her love. I will cherish this because I know what it represents. It represents love. It represents the last gift that a mother was giving her children because she knew she was going to be separated from them. And again, as Otis says from time to time in his presentation, it represented their land, their culture, and their identity.
Okay, you ready? All right. Okay, let's speed to the end. I said I'm going to give you an exam before you leave, right? Okay. This is the statue of Zumbi in the museum. You can see it a little better here. It's a beautiful statue. He's in his warlike pose. Now, Zumbi Day is celebrated November 20th of every year. It is called Black Consciousness Day. Now, that is absolutely fantastic. Now, just think. If we had a provision in the American Constitution that recognized the contribution of Indians and Africans in slavery to the making of the United States. Because of the 1988 Constitution and some of the enabling acts with it, the country of Brazil has established a holiday to celebrate blackness, celebrate the slaves, celebrate the indigenous people. It's called Zumbi Day, and it's held all over the country on November the 20th. Now, this is a video of the celebration. You remember I showed you Palmares Memorial Park. This is where this takes place. If you go to Brazil, try to go around November the 20th so you can enjoy this celebration up in the Northeast. It's an experience that you won't forget. In the capital city called Maceió, which is in the northeast of Brazil. And it's held on November the 20th. They kind of start the celebrations, people start getting ready and all that sort of thing, and the actual celebration is on November 20th. This is capoeira. We talked a lot about capoeira, the martial art for the Africans. You remember I said that capoeira was a martial art that was created by the slaves to relieve their stress and tension and so forth, and they still practice this today. I tried to do it, but you know, it's not possible. Go ahead. All right. They have dances all over the memorial park. Okay, that's it, folks. I want to leave you with one of the signs that they have there. In Brazil, it is a crime to use a racial epithet. You cannot disparage any race of people over there. They will bring you up on charges. Okay, they're very serious about that. So what do they say? Their sign in Portuguese says, respect knows no color. All right? So, thank you for coming out. Oh, I give you the exam. I got to give you the exam. Everybody passes, okay? And the reason you pass is that you suffered through this for about an hour and a half, okay? So thank you so much. I'll sign any books if you choose to buy some. Thank you so much. And thank you, Tig. Appreciate it. All right. Yes. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer any questions that you might have.
I do have one.
Yes, sure.
So, most of the places you went, were they speaking Portuguese or Spanish, or what were they speaking?
Portuguese.
And did you understand any of it?
No. But we always had a guide with us. You don't go without a guide because you can't understand the language. Every now and then, but they do not speak English. Yes, ma'am.
Off of her language question,
Yes.
were they also speaking any African dialects or native dialects or any mixing of those words in?
Yes, they do, but amongst themselves. The outsiders come in, you know, they're going to communicate in Portuguese, and as I said earlier, they don't do much with English. But they do have certain African dialects. This is part of the culture that they're trying to keep and hold on for their kids. So they do have that. But of course, predominantly, they speak Portuguese. Yes, ma'am.
The utilities going to their community, how did that work when they get this land, like electricity, like you were talking something about the water, right?
Yes, yes, yes.
How does that all work with the government who's having a hard time with them?
All right, yes. Well, the government brings some of the utilities to them. They run electricity. Some of them have computer access, depending upon how sophisticated they are. And you understand that when they get recognition, this is when they start getting modernization. But they got to cross that threshold of first being able to prove to the authorities that they're genuine, okay, that their ancestors were here to work the land. And once they do that, the door opens, they get water, they get health care, they get electricity, all that good stuff. Yes, sir.
Does the granting does the conveyance of ownership convey any sort of self-governance to the territory?
All right.
And the second part, does that conveyance filter down to individual property ownership as well?
All right, little complex question. Let me break it down. These are not independent states. They still must obey Brazilian law.
Okay.
In their association, they have their rules. So within the residents of the association, they have to obey their rules. For example, if a young lady marries somebody outside of the Quilombo bloodline or whatever, they have to come in and submit to the association's rules, all right? So they cannot legislate any laws that would apply to the society at large, but they can legislate their own individual conduct within that. Now, what was the other part of the question?
Individual ownership of property.
Well, there's no individual ownership of property, as I mentioned, because it's called collective title. The association owns the title. But each individual who's a member of the Quilombo has the same rights as anybody else in the Quilombo, equal. And they give them homes, and you know, they have their own plots and lands and so forth. They have soccer fields, they have restaurants, all this sort of thing. They have a health center, all of that, but not individually owned. Yes, sir.
We just got back from Norway, and they're having a problem with what they're calling urbanization.
Yes.
The countryside is losing all of the people in the less urban, more rural parts of Norway, all moving to the cities.
Yes.
Are they having that same sort of problem? Are there young people moving away from these areas into the cities?
Okay, interesting question. Now, for those of you that were here before, I told you about the Quilombo Socapa, which is right outside of Rio in a very expensive area. That land that they occupy is worth 50 million US dollars. And they are located right in a high rent area surrounded by high-end apartment buildings and all that. The government is after these people. The leader of that, Quilombo, told us that they had filed 17 lawsuits against them. And they're fighting to hold on to that very valuable land, 350 million Brazilian dollars. So the young folks, they want to sell out, all right? They want to grab that cash and go. They don't want to be fighting the Quilombola war, okay? So a lot of the young people in other Quilombos, they want to stay in their land. And the culture of these Quilombos is they want the children to stay because they want the children to perpetuate it. You see, the collectivization of the title lasts only as long as their descendants there to occupy it. That's a prerequisite. So if they depopulate, if everybody leaves, who's going to be there? The government's going to come in and snatch it. The concept of what? Eminent domain. We know what that is in American law, right? In Brazilian, it's called expropriation. And what that is it gives the right of the state to expropriate the land, and this is how they have taken the land from private property owners and given it to the Quilombolas. It's called expropriation. And the only way they can legally do that is, of course, through the use of Article 68 and the accompanying articles that go with it, Article 215 and Article 216. Okay? Yes, ma'am.
I'm interested in the religious practices. You said that most of them are Catholic.
Yes.
I would love to know if they have traveling priests who come in from the diocese in Brazil, or how much they really do participate in Catholicism structurally there.
All right, I don't know exactly if they have traveling priests or bishops that come in. We didn't hear about that, but you know, they practice Catholicism in some way, so they must have a religious leader, a Catholic or something, who comes in and conducts the ceremonies and so forth. Now, they also practice what is known as candomblé. Candomblé is a religious kind of ceremony. It's what we call, in the literature, it's called a syncretic religion because it's a blend of African religion and Catholicism, candomblé. And they practice that. So they practice that. They practice what is known as Umbanda. Umbanda, again, is an African kind of religion. So, you know, these Africans brought with them their religions. All right? They had their gods, they had their religion. And so they brought some of that, and they're trying to keep that going. Umbanda is very important. Candomblé is another one, that they practice their religion. As far as how they actually actuate the Catholicism, I couldn't answer that completely because I don't know. But they're obviously worshiping it very seriously because most of them have an underpinning for Catholicism. Because, you know, Brazil was basically a Catholic country in terms of its religion. Yes, ma'am.
I'm interested in the healthcare.
Interested in the healthcare? All right.
Small communities.
Mm-hmm.
Do they have a hospital or like an urgent care? Or do they have to go out of the community?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. To deal with it. I'm going to let Michelle, she's an expert in healthcare, answer that question.
Well, it depends. For some of the Quilombos that we visited, they did have, within their community, a health section. Okay, that would take care of just minor things, you know, colds, scrapes, that sort of thing. But if something was very, very serious, then they would use the hospital in the local city.
And how far away is that?
Well, it just
Do you have
depends.
emergency?
Right, well, it depends. It's just like with their school system, they have to have buses that take the children to the schools. So it really would depend. But they do have transportation. Some of them have cars that they can take, if necessary, someone who needs emergency care to the hospitals. But for the most part, they also use their herbs and the natural vegetation that they have used for years and years to help with a lot of the problems that they have in the community. As Otis had mentioned before, they grow their own crops. They don't have a lot of additives to their food. So their foods are very, very natural, truly delicious, just amazing. No salt, no pepper. I mean, you don't really need it. It's just so.
No heart disease there, right?
Well, they do have some heart disease. They also have
Diabetes, they suffer from a lot of the common ails,
Yes, yes.
you know, because they're exposed to the regular society. And though they have a lot of natural food and so forth, they still suffer. They had, some of them had part of the pandemic, COVID, but it took very little effect on them because they're up in the mountains. So maybe one or two of them got sick and died, but basically it didn't, you know, affect them all that greatly because they're isolated. Yes, yes.
And they were able to take care of themselves.
Yes. Okay.
I know she has a question.
Yes.
I was wondering what the foods, what was it? Was it vegetarian mainly, or were there meat products?
They did. Some had turkeys. They had some grew turkeys, chickens, some beef for sure, and of course all types of fruits that they had within their community that they grew. I mean, they had just so much crops and etc. That they would never run out of food, and it was just so nutritious. We were at one place and they had this delicious juice.
Yes.
I
Yes.
I forget
the name of it as well. Mm-hmm.
But it was green, I
Yes.
remember that.
Yeah, right.
And it was so hot there. I mean, it was terribly hot when we visited these places. But when they gave us this juice, it was so refreshing. It really gave us more energy to continue what we were there to do. And no sugar-based or anything. I don't know what they added to it, or it was just natural flavor from those fruits that they combined. But the food was just outstanding. It was very, very good.
Very good.
And they don't have any, when we noticed, they didn't have any too many issues with obesity because, you know, this is a lot of land, and they travel back and forth walking throughout their community. But every Quilombo is different. I asked the gentleman at Astrogilda, you know, well, what animals or whatever wild animals do you have roaming? He said, well, we have pumas that roam around, and we have anacondas that roam around. And so he said, but they won't bother you. I said, I don't know about that. He said, no, they won't bother you. I said, well, I don't know. So we didn't venture out really into the forest because they do have wild.
Well, Tig wants to go up into the mountains and actually find out what's really up there.
Yeah. So he can tell us.
Yes, yes, ma'am.
Did you include any recipes?
No, there are no recipes. We didn't get the recipes.
No.
Maybe next time.
No. And they're all in Portuguese, so we'd have to get them translated.
Translated. Yes, yes, yes.
These Quilombo
Quilombo have a school system?
Yes,
or
they get education from the neighboring cities. And a lot of time they will have an elementary school in the Quilombo. The higher upper school, they usually travel to the adjacent city. And they, as Michelle said, they will drive or they use public transportation. And getting an education is a big deal for them. We didn't spend a lot of time on that. You have to be here another hour. But you know, education is a big deal. Try to get these people educated. They want to be educated, but of course it's tough. And some of them drop out because they are criticized and demonized because they are Quilombos. So it's a tough thing. But again, this is good. They are improving, but they got their problems in terms of assimilating or getting involved in Brazilian culture to the extent that they can take care of all of these things like education and healthcare, sewage, electricity, and all that sort of thing. So, we're done. Everybody pass. I'm glad that you hung in there. We appreciate it very much. Thank you. N-A-T-T-A. Oh, aren't you smart?
Spell it differently.
Yeah.